after the cabinet is dry, you're left with screws where all your dados meet. So I'm going to replace these with 3/8 inch dowels. But if you don't want to do that, you can keep the screws in there. I would make them a little bit longer because these ones I put in are 1/2 inch. And you can countersink them with a countersinking bit on your drill. And then either put a wood button in there to cover the hole or a piece of dowel. I just put a little piece of electrical tape on the end of my drill bit as a rough depth gauge for how deep to drill these holes. And then I just freehand them into the cabinet. With a little syringe filled with glue, you can easily fill up the hole. And then add your dowel. So I'm ready to put a face frame on this. And you can get away without putting a face frame on these because the doors are so thick and our verticals are so thick you don't really need it. But the reason I do it is because you can see where the joints of the door are throughout the door, and since we split this in half, you don't have that thick piece of lumber and then the accompanying joiner on the other side. So in order to sure up all the parts where you cut the doors, if you put a face frame on it, it'll help this from sagging over time. So I usually make my face frames with the pocket hole jig, but since this is just one frame and it's only 7 pieces, I decided to try making it with lap joints. So I cut all my pieces to length and height, and then just put a couple brads in each one to hold them perfectly in place for where they're going to go. And then put my stiles on top of my rails and did the same thing. Then I'm going to go through and mark the tops and the bottoms of each intersection. That will show me where I'm going to cut my laps. So in order to get a consistent depth on all my laps, I took a scrap piece of the poplar I'm using for the face frame and cut 2 loose lap joints on each one and snuck up on the joint until it was at the perfect depth. It's making, minimal increments until it fit so they're flush. Then I set up my fence and ran one of my rails through my dado stack until I got a perfect fit for where my stiles are going to go. Now with this setup, I could take all 3 of my rails and cut every single one of the ends so they're identical. In order to cut the laps in the middle of my joint, I'd take my piece with the marks on the edge so I could see them and slide it really close to my dado blade. As soon as it was slightly touching, I would slide it ever so slightly left or right until the blade lined up perfectly with the marks, and then sent it through. So I've got all my lap joints together and it's dry fit on top of my carcass, And you could see the laps, how everything goes together. It's a little bit off because I haven't. So now I'm going to take everything apart, put glue on all the lap joints, put it back together, and then put some brads throughout the whole thing to hold it to the carcass while it dries. Before I put the doors on, I wanted to add shelves to all the bottom cabinets. And since this is a TV cabinet, I believe all that's being put down here is going to be DVDs. So there was no reason to put super heavy duty shelving. So I just made a mark dividing these into equal amounts, and then just put a runner on either side, and then cut a piece of MDF. For each shelf, and then I'll screw these in place. With the face frame installed, I was ready to do my final sand on the entire piece before prime and paint. I started with 80 grit sandpaper and worked my way up to 120, just knocking down the rough spots. I also custom made doors for this cabinet, and that build is a couple videos in and of itself. So if you want to see how to make doors for a cabinet like this, I'll put a link in the description of the video. I used Ready Patch to patch all the nail holes left over from attaching the face frame and any other little holes in the cabinet already. I put this on thick enough to leave a little bit of a bulge on the top of all the holes because Ready Patch is super easy to sand and it dries pretty quick. And as it dries, it will shrink. So if you add a little extra to each hole, once you sand it, it'll be nice and flush. After sanding, I attached the backer in that rabbet on the back side of the cabinet. This is just scrap 1/4 inch plywood that I had lying around the shop from taking apart other projects and stuff I found in the trash. Ideally, this would be one straight piece of wood, but I didn't have that, so 2 sections is more than enough to stabilize this piece. And I just attached it with I countersink some holes with my drill and then attached the backer with 1 1/4 inch screws. I'm still waiting on the hardware for my doors, so I can't dry fit those yet. So now that I've patched all my holes, this is going to be ready for primer. And the last step before I put 2 coats of primer on it is I want to put some molding along this top edge to hide the fact that these aren't blind dados and to just give it a nice finished look. We get a lot of molding from jobs, people that want us to fix stuff, and we end up getting to keep the molding. So I have this piece of a door casement, and I'm just going to rip it on the table saw to the same width as this and attach it. With the square edge I just created by ripping the molding on the table saw, I went back with a small block plane and just rounded over the edge. Then I measured end to end on the top piece of molding and cut 2 45-degree miters with my chop saw. I attached the molding with glue and brads to my cabinet and then cut the sides the same way. I was given a HVLP sprayer about a year ago for free from a friend, and I haven't used it yet. But I decided to use it on this project because I absolutely hate painting, and anything to make it go faster I'll do. And it worked pretty well. This model, they don't make it anymore because it's an older model, but I did a quick Google search and it looks like you could get one quite similar to this one at Home Depot or Lowe's for about 40 or 50 bucks, and it's worth the investment. This model, I don't know if they've changed, but this one you have to use oil-based stains, oil-based primer, and oil-based paint that's thin in order for it to work. It just makes the process so much faster. In between coats, I put on 2 coats of primer, and in between coats I sanded down all the rough spots, which were mostly secluded to the new plywood with 120 grit sandpaper, and then went and put a second coat on. And at this point I attached the backer because while these sprayers have low overspray, they did kind of get some of my patio rocks a little dirty, so I put the backer on to keep the spray down. When it came time for the color coat, it was raining outside, so I had to move the piece into my shop. And for the top coat, it was a black enamel paint, semi-gloss, and I put on 2 coats of that. Once this dried, I attached the doors and then delivered it to its new home.